In the heat of the Arizona desert, where the sun carved shadows sharp enough to cut across the sand, and the wind carried the faint whisper of ancient drums, a lone rider pressed forward on his weary white horse, his hat pulled low and his eyes narrow against the glare. His name was Thomas McGraw, a man known across the frontier as both a bounty hunter and a drifter, one who had seen enough blood spilled across the land to know that fortune never came without a price. He had set out that morning in search of strayed cattle for the rancher who had hired him, but fate had a different plan, one that neither his revolver nor his experience had prepared him for. For in the shimmering distance, among the brittle mesquite bushes and the jagged rocks, he caught sight of movement, delicate yet swift, a shadow that did not belong to a coyote or deer. Instinct made him grip the reins tighter and nudge his horse toward the rustling sound. And as he drew closer, the figure revealed itself. A young woman, her long, raven-black hair streaming like a banner behind her, her moccasins barely making a sound against the earth as she darted. She wore a fringed dress marked with bright beads, and in that instant, Thomas knew she was Apache, one of the people the settlers both feared and misunderstood. Before he could even call out, she spotted him, her eyes fierce as obsidian, and she bolted, disappearing into the rocks like smoke in the wind. He gave chase, more from curiosity than malice, spurring his horse over the hard ground, the thunder of hooves echoing across the desert like distant drums. The girl ran with the swiftness of a deer, but the horse gained ground, and within moments, Thomas was upon her. She turned suddenly, a blade flashing in her hand, a small obsidian knife raised high as she prepared to strike. His instincts took over. He lunged from the saddle, tackling her to the ground. The knife fell from her grasp, and before either of them could breathe, his lasso looped around her wrists with practiced precision. She struggled like a wildcat, kicking, thrashing, her eyes burning with hatred. But he held firm, binding her hands and pulling her to her feet. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said in a low drawl. Though he doubted she understood his words, the girl spat at the ground defiantly, her chest heaving, her dignity unbroken. Thomas looked around the empty desert, realizing suddenly the gravity of what he had done. He had captured an Apache girl, alone, and far from her people, and in a land simmering with tension between settlers and tribes. Such an act could ignite a firestorm. He knew enough about the Apache to fear the retribution that might follow. Yet he could not simply let her go, not without understanding who she was and why she had been alone. So he secured her to the saddle horn and rode back toward the village where the ranchers and their families lived, unaware that the moment would set in motion a tale that no one in that village would ever forget. The ride was long and silent, save for the creak of leather and the pounding of hooves. Thomas felt her eyes on him, unyielding, unafraid, and it unsettled him. She was no ordinary captive. She carried herself like someone born of fire and storm. When they reached the outskirts of the settlement, curious eyes turned toward them. Children stopped playing. Women at wash basins paused, and men at the saloon door straightened. Murmurs rippled through the dusty street. He caught one of them. Someone whispered, "An Apache girl." Thomas dismounted slowly, the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on him. He untied her, keeping a firm grip as she stood tall, despite the ropes around her wrists. Even bound, she seemed to command the air around her, as though the desert itself bent to her will. The sheriff stepped out of his office, a broad man with a gray mustache and weary eyes, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "McGraw, what in hell are you doing bringing her here?" he demanded. The girl's gaze did not waver. She stared at the sheriff as though measuring his soul. "Found her running out by the ridge," Thomas replied. "Figured she might have been scouting for a raiding party." A murmur of fear passed through the onlookers, the memory of raids and bloodshed never far from their minds. "Best we lock her up before her people come looking," the sheriff said grimly. But before Thomas could answer, the girl suddenly spoke, her voice steady and sharp, the words foreign, yet filled with power. The townsfolk flinched, though they could not understand her tongue. Thomas felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. It was not what she said that chilled him, but the conviction with which she said it, like a prophecy hanging in the desert air. The sheriff motioned to the deputies to take her, but Thomas found himself stepping between them, surprising even himself. "She ain't a criminal," he said firmly, "and we don't know why she was alone out there." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "You bringin' trouble down on all our heads, McGraw," he growled. But Thomas stood his ground. The girl's dark eyes met his for the first time, and in that moment he felt something shift, as though destiny had woven their fates together. The night fell heavy over the village, lanterns flickering as whispers filled every corner. Some wanted her gone, others feared killing her would bring vengeance, yet no one could ignore the strange aura she carried. Thomas sat outside the makeshift cell where she was kept, listening to the quiet hum of the desert, when suddenly she spoke again, her words halting but broken with fragments of English. "You no kill," she said, her eyes fixed on his. Thomas leaned forward, startled. "No, I ain't gonna kill you," he replied softly. She held his gaze, then added, "Soon, you see, storm come." He frowned, not sure whether she meant a real storm or something darker. And though he tried to push the unease aside, deep down, he knew she spoke the truth. Something was coming, something that would shake the village to its core. And as the first coyote howled in the distance, Thomas realized this was no ordinary capture. It was the beginning of a reckoning, one that would test his loyalty, his courage, and his very soul. And before the week was out, the whole village would never look at him or the girl the same way again. And for those who wish to see how this story unfolds, make sure to stay with us, because what comes next will leave you breathless. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of this tale of fate, fire, and the storm born in the desert night.